Hey everybody, this is Perch. I think we've talked a bit about the movies and the comics, and the fact that the movies aren't really helping the comics. That the sales that you would expect to kind of spin out of the comics don't happen with the movies. It does make me wonder, and I continue to wonder why the comics make such efforts to change characters around and basically modify who they are. By the way, some people wrote in. I mentioned I don't know several videos ago the Sam Jackson recreation in the MCU to match the Nick Fury that was in Iron Man. And some people pointed out, well, the Ultimate Universe had Sam Jackson as Nick Fury long before that, and that is true. That is absolutely true. That it was actually one of the cooler moments that in Iron Man they had Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury, who was a Nick Fury in the Ultimate Universe rather than the regular MCU universe. Anyway, it was fun. It was kind of cool that everything, and it's also led to me kind of thinking in general that the MCU, in a lot of ways, felt more connected to the Ultimate Universe than the regular Marvel Universe in the first phase or two. It felt very connected to that. It didn't feel, and I think it was better. As the MCU has moved on and we've gotten into phase three, phase four, and kind of all this other stuff, it started to feel a lot less like the Ultimate Universe and a lot more like the main Marvel Universe. And of course, the Ultimate Universe was kind of folded into the Marvel Universe some time ago. And anyway, it feels like the MCU patterned after your Ultimate Universe was a better plan. And probably, that's a video in and of itself. But regardless, that's kind of what is going on there. Anyway, so here's the mail. So we've talked about like the movies are not really helping the comics, but are the movies actually hurting the comics? That's the premise on the table. Let's see. It says, Perch, here's a mail with kind of question. Hey there, I hope you're having a great and safe weekend. Well, Wakanda forever. Sorry, Black Panther, Wakanda forever. No, sorry, Namor and Wakanda forever. Will premiere soon as part of the MCU Phase 4. And by the time this video comes out, it may have been out and already out of the theaters. Unfortunately, this movie already seems to be on life support. After the high point of the MCU, after Avengers Endgame, we're now seeing the MCU spiral to the bottom with Eternals, Thor, Love and Thunder, and the Disney Plus She-Hulk and potentially Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. I don't know, spiral to the bottom, but it is... yeah, so the problem is that in movies, people kind of expect to, have a conclusion to a story. There's the natural end point to a lot of things. And where the MCU is concerned, it was like the movies built to Avengers Endgame, and then that was the conclusion. And people went home and they're done. And then the MCU kept going. The normie movie audience, it's confusing a little bit why it's still going. And the question mark is, well, if it's still going, like, how do we get back, like, Robert Downey Jr., and how do you, like, it? The thought process is not of a comic fan. The thought process is of a movie fan. For the movie fan, the fact that there's more movies doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, I think the movie audience was like, hey, I was really invested in this MCU. I went to see some characters I knew, like Spider-Man and Thor and all that kind of stuff. And then, I was willing to invest in some things I didn't know, like Doctor Strange and Guardians of the Galaxy. That was kind of cool. And then I think you get to this point of like the Eternals. You're like, the Eternals, like, okay, what's the hook? Who are the big actors and actresses? Oh, Angelina Jolie is like the big actor in this. There's that guy from Game of Thrones. There's another guy from Game of Thrones. Like, what are we doing here? Where's Wong? That's kind of where it comes from. And same kind of thing is true with the Disney Plus series, where it's like, all right, we're going to kind of get a, what happened to the Scarlet Witch? Okay. And so now we've got a White Vision and there's Agatha. Like, what, oh, that song was popular on iTunes, but anyway, it's just like it's confusing the normie audience. Like the normie audience is looking at this going, hey, are we kind of veering toward a conclusion or an end point, or like, are the X-Men showing up? Like, what's going on? Like, that's the current problem that the audience has with the MCU. It no longer feels like it has any kind of trajectory. It's just all over the place. So that's, the ticket sales are down. Now, COVID is masking some of that, but I also think in general, there's no clear tether. Relatively quickly, the MCU had two things it was trying to accomplish out the gate in phase one. It was hey, we're going to introduce these iconic characters and we're going to bring them together. So people are like, we're going to see Captain America meet Thor for the first time. It's like, no, the first time happened in comics like 50 years ago, but okay. We're going to have, Iron Man meet the Hulk, and that's kind of exciting. Okay. But now, and then we're going to see them team up. And at the end of the first team up of Avengers, we got to see Thanos, which looked like a big villain that's going to come and F things up in a little way. And then they teased it kind of continuously across a bunch of movies. Now the MCU is like, where is this going? Okay, we got a multiverse and we got Scarlet Witch is somehow evil now. And is that what's going on? And I mean, okay, like what's happening is kind of the current, question mark that people have for the MCU. We got this Kang guy in the Loki series. That's a new big villain now? He showed up in Ant-Man. We went from Loki, the TV series, to Ant-Man 3. This is how is this the big villain? That's what people are thinking. And we'll see where it all goes. The MCU is a bit of a mess. Anyway, the mail continues. It says, how much is the underwhelming performance of the MCU Phase 4 movies affecting the sales and title launches for Marvel Comics? Or are most moviegoers so out of comic books that the MCU Phase 4 movies have little effect on Marvel Comics? Thanks for everything that you do. So I don't believe the movies are having a direct impact on the comics for the same reason that they didn't cause them to rise in sales. They're also not causing them to fail in sales. So it's net zero. Except the comics are adjusting themselves to line up to the movies. So whereas the comics never benefited from changing themselves to the movies, the comic books continuing to try and make themselves look like the MCU, when the MCU is suffering, or the MCU is kind of not grabbing audiences in the same way, I think is having a detrimental effect. Just like when Marvel, the comics, said, we need to make the Inhumans a big deal because the Inhumans are going to be, we can't do something with the X-Men, so the Inhumans are going to be a big deal in the MCU. They're going to show up in TV, and they're going to have their own series, and then they're going to probably be in movies, and there's going to be a bunch of Inhuman stuff. There's a moment where in the MCU it sounded like the Inhumans were going to be a big deal. And so the comics all pivoted to take advantage of that. Unfortunately, the people, nobody wanted that. The comics that came about from that change were terrible, and sales suffered as a result. This was in that 2016, 2017 timeframe when things were not good for Marvel. And there wasn't any kind of hiding it around actually things are great, and the comic sales are up and everybody's happy. There was none of that to kind of hide under. It just was bad. And we're about to live that again. We are kind of living that again as Marvel gives us the Eternals in a big event and a bunch of other dumb stuff. As the more Marvel leans in to some of these elements, the worse it gets. So Marvel will put out a comic book for, Riri, and will put out a comic book for all these characters that are getting Disney Plus series. The problem is the Disney Plus series are not taking off. And one of the reasons they're not taking off is because they're just not interesting to the masses. So if they're not interesting to the masses in the movies, it's highly unlikely they're going to be interesting to the masses in the comic books. And on top of that, your main comic audience are of collectors who have been collecting for some time who are not going to be excited about canceling some of the big characters they've been collecting for the last 30 years and having them replaced with Disney Plus, themed shows. And that's kind of where I do think the Marvel Series 4 starts to hurt the comics. If the comics just did their own thing and didn't worry about it, I don't think it would harm the comics at all because they're decoupled enough. But as the comics try and replicate the MCU, that's where it's less that the movies are doing it to comics; it's the comics are doing it to themselves. Or in the words of wrestling, Brett screwed Brett. I think that's kind of what you have here, and I do think it's a decent problem that Marvel is steering themselves into. The challenge that Marvel has with their line right now is that it doesn't feel like anything is particularly urgent. It feels like a bunch of kind of decoupled random storylines that don't have any kind of cohesive plot. And even within the titles themselves, and it doesn't help when you have big events like, X-Men Avengers Eternals, where the conclusion of that event is, and everything was undone. Oh, one of the Eternals that you didn't really know about is now ascended to godhood, and so there's that. And maybe we'll remember that. I don't know. At one point, there was the Eternals were hanging out in San Francisco too, and there's a Celestial there in the park, and that thing kind of walked away and moved at some point, I guess, in some comic. We don't remember, but it's not there anymore. Remember when the Celestial was just hanging out in San Francisco, just standing there? That was a time. I mean, that's how this era feels. It feels like, hey, we're doing a bunch of shit and it'll be over someday. Hey, Doctor Strange is dead, but I mean, check back in later. He'll be back. He'll be fine. That's how Marvel feels. It doesn't feel like, hey, you should buy these comics because there may be a lasting change and something you should pay attention to. It doesn't feel that way. And people will, quick to point out, it's like, well, but Marvel, they brought the Phoenix back to life. You thought, oh, Jean Grey's dead forever, and then she came back to life. So, comics have never had lasting change. Yeah, that's not true, though. They have, and comics at least have given the illusion or feeling of lasting change. And if you're going to connect the comics to the movies aren't particularly, successful, and the comics feel like they're spinning their wheels as a result. Where are we? Where do we land there? We land nowhere is where we land there. So anyway, that's where we're at. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.